G'day, my name's Tim, and here are my top 10 books of all time. I'm a writer, I'm a reader, and I'm a creator, and in today's video, I want to share my favorite 10 books with you. Of the 700 books I've read in my adult life, these are my top 10. And the way I decided this list was pretty simple. It's the books that I love, it's the books that I reread, it's the books that I return to over and over again. But more than anything else, it's the books that I can't stop thinking about. And it's a pretty great list, so I've decided to share them with you. But before I do, I want to hear from you guys what your favorite books of all time are in the comments below, because I'm always looking for new hidden gems, new discoveries, new reads that are going to be added to my top 10 books of all time. Anyway, let's get stuck on in. Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey, my favorite book of 2025, and for good reason. This story follows the Salt family, who are the final inhabitants on Shearwater Island, an island off the coast of Tasmania. On this island, they are protecting the world's largest seed vault, and as climate change threatens and sea levels begin to rise, they are preparing for their final months on this island. And everything changes when they have the largest storm in the island's history hit the coast, and mysteriously, a woman washes ashore. This is a mystery that wraps into a psychological thriller, that wraps into a love story, that wraps into something that transcends all of that. It's an ecological climate change novel that really makes you think, reflect, and shifts your perspective in the way that we are treating the planet. It's been a long time since I've read something that I feel like I am inserted into in a way that I just can't quite forget. I can picture the little trails, I can picture the ocean waves, I can picture these characters fully formed. It almost feels like I watched a film of this book rather than reading the book, which is a incredibly mastercraft writing ability from Charlotte McConaughey. And truthfully, I could talk about this book all day, but what it made me do was notice the little details, the rocks that are slightly out of place, the blades of grass as they blow in the breeze, the trees as they just slowly encapsulate an open sky. And it's honestly one of the most beautiful novels I've ever read. And I want to say so much more, but this is The Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey. Okay, next up is Beartown by Frederick Backman. I don't have a copy of the Beartown book at the moment because I lent it out to somebody, but I do have a copy of the second one, so that's going to be the placeholder, I guess. Beartown follows the story of a small, isolated Swedish town, and the economic success of this town relies on the junior ice hockey team. And all of that goes up in the air as the star player of that junior ice hockey team commits a sexual assault act against the general manager's daughter, with the resulting accusations and trauma rippling into the community. Beartown explores the themes of community and power and privilege while also diving into the negative sides of toxic masculinity and peer pressure. And on the more positive side, it has themes of courage and hope and love and change. I think this is my favorite trilogy of all time. I've gone back and reread this trilogy a couple of different times now, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, but Frederick Backman almost gets you like you are on the edge of a knife and split you open in the middle to connect emotionally with the reader, but the world, but the character. And I'll never quite grasp how he does it. It's said in the unspoken details. So yeah, if you want a trilogy that'll make you shiver and weep, but fill you with love and shatter your emotions while also dangling hope on the other end, Frederick Backman, the Beartown trilogy, is just that. I should also note that some of these books have featured on this very channel before, but they are books that I have loved, they are books that I've reread, they are books that every time I come back to them, I come back to them with a new perspective and a different lease on life. And so the hope is that you resonate with that in some way, shape, or form. Anyway, the next one I've got on this list is Tomorrow When the War Began by the late John Marsden. John Marsden unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but this was a young adult series that I fell in love with when I was 14 years old. Tomorrow When the War Began follows the story of Ali and her friends who go camping on a long weekend, but they have no idea that their lives are going to change forever. 5 days later, they return, and when they return, they discover that something is horribly wrong. It is not long after that they find out that they have been invaded by a foreign country and that their families have been taken by enemy soldiers. And Ellie and her friends have two choices. They can surrender or they can learn how to fight. The Tomorrow When the War Began series extends for 7 books, but the first one cracks my top 10. This is the ultimate coming of age story in an incredibly unique situation, diving into loss, diving into grief, diving into change, but also courage and the uglier sides of ourselves. It's encompassed with fear, but it also dives into war, law, and ethics in a way that really captivates you and makes you think. I can single-handedly say that this is the novel that made me want to be a writer, and I can also single-handedly say that this is the novel that I could put a question next to and say, is this the novel that has changed me more than any other novel over the course of time? I don't know. All that to say, we'll find out tomorrow when the war began by John Marsden. I fucking love that book, man. Next up, 11/22/63 by Stephen King. This is an epic love story that follows the story of Jake Epping, who is an English teacher who ends up finding a time portal through a diner through his friend Al. This time portal goes back to the late 50s, and Al sets him this quest to see if he can stop the John F. Kennedy assassination. He's reluctant on this quest and eventually decides to go back in time and to see if he can stop that assassination and change the course of history. And at its core, it's a love story that follows this man who has struggled through his regular life in the future as he goes back into time. It's a story that forces him into being a more courageous human being. It's a story that allows him to be the writer and the creator of his own world and his own narrative after shying away from it for so long. And more than anything else, it's a time travel story that is just rich and full and keeps you guessing. This is my absolute favorite Stephen King book from start to finish, and I've reread it at least 3 different times, and I just keep coming back to it, keep thinking about it, and keep wondering if I would step through that time portal. Anyway, that's 11/22/63 by Stephen King. All right, Cloud Street by Tim Winton is an epic, sprawling Australian novel that follows 2 different families who, through separate different tragedies, unite and end up living in this one house together at number 1 Cloud Street. It's a novel that spans over 20 years, and this is one of those novels that stays with you long after you read the final page, and you don't understand it until long after you have turned that final page. It explores chance versus choice. It explores family and trauma and healing, but also the spiritual and the supernatural. This isn't a time traveling novel, but it makes you feel like you've gone back into 1970s Western Australia and be part of that landscape and be part of the house on Cloud Street. And when I was thinking about which Tim Winton novel to include on this list, because there are several that I could, it ended up being Cloud Street because I just can't stop thinking about it. Be really curious to see what that house actually looks like. Like, do you think it's a real house or do you not? I love talking about books, man. Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates is a non-fiction book which is written as a letter to his son, exploring the meaning of being Black in America, grappling with the violence and being Black in America and the country's myth of the dream. And this is in my top 10 because it is one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. And I constantly find myself coming back and turning its pages, reading little snippets here and there, reading the entire thing here and there, thinking about it, reflecting on it. And I'll read what Toni Morrison said about Ta-Nehisi Coates. I've been wondering who might fill the intellectual void that plagued me after James Baldwin died. Clearly, it's Ta-Nehisi Coates. The language between the world and me, like Coates' journey, is visceral, eloquent, and beautifully redemptive. And it's an examination of the hazards and the hopes of Black male life as profound as it is revelatory. This is required reading. It is stunning, it is beautiful, it is important, and it means something. And this is what writing is really about. All right, Barbarian Days by William Finnegan, A Surfing Life. This follows the story of William growing up in California and then later Hawaii, and then his surf trips into the South Pacific and this journey that he undertakes throughout traveling full-time and living in South Africa. And really, it's a story about relationships and love and connection as community, but it is this incredible memoir. It won the Pulitzer Prize for memoir in 2014, and it is a stunning, lyrical, written memoir. You catch yourself just thinking how incredible it is to read about something that someone cares about so much that they've dedicated their entire life to in a way that is accessible to anybody. I read this over 10 years ago when it first came out, and it captured me and instilled me with this life of adventure in a different way and traveling the world and changing how we thought about it. And written with this criticism of himself, but this understanding and this growth and this learning, and with prose as sparkly as the ocean and adventures as big as giant waves. Barbarian Days by William Finnegan will make you want to perhaps be a surfer. I thought long and hard about which Richard Flanagan book I should include on this list. I ended up including The Narrow Road to the Deep North, August of 1943, on a Japanese POW camp on the Death Railroad. Australian surgeon is haunted by his love affair from 2 years ago with his uncle's wife, all while struggling to save the men under his command from starvation and the beatings, and everything changes when he receives a letter. Richard Flanagan is considered one of the finest Australian writers in his generation. This is a stunning novel. It is captivating. It is beautiful. It is haunting. It won the Man Booker Prize in 2014, and I've reread it a couple of times now. It's a brutal yet beautiful story that captures the human spirit and the cruelties of war, while also the impossibility of love. And my whole body is just tense because I want to describe it in a way that gives it justice. And I simply don't think I can. But that's The Narrow Road to the Deep North by Richard Flanagan. If I'm being completely honest, that should tell you everything that you need to know. That if my body is in full tense and I'm struggling to explain it, it means that it's too grand for words. They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us by Hanif Arajukeeb is this stunning essay collection that explores the intersections of music and identity and survival. This is an essay collection that I remember taking into the Australian bush, middle of nowhere, and reading this collection about things that didn't matter, about rap, about emo music, about the world, and realizing that it holds up to this standard of when you remove everything and simplify your life, it still matters. It explores the intersections of grief and violence, but also dives into music as a coping mechanism and an escape and an art form. And morbidly, I really enjoy this concept of fragility of hope and how fine the wall between hope and loss is, and how they kind of intersect somewhere in the middle. And Hanif is just this lyrical poet that writes his prose in this lyrical way that I feel like if you sung the sentences out loud, they would almost come out as a song. Anyway, that's They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. And the final book on this list is Limberlost by Robbie Arnott. This list isn't ranked in any particular order, but if I'm going to rank this list, Limberlost by Robbie Arnott is at the very top. In the heat of a long summer, Ned is selling rabbit pelts in order to buy himself a boat. His brothers are off at war. His dad and his sister are preoccupied and struggling with that time period. And this follows Ned through the next decades of his life and how the decisions that he made in that summer changed the course of his life, the fate of his family, the fate of the valley, and the death and the rebirth of all of it. And as I was thinking about how to describe this book in a way that I haven't described it before, all that came to me was that this book feels, strangely enough, like home. It feels warm, it feels full, it feels homey, even though it is a challenging story, even though it is fractured and splintered, it feels like something more and closer and honest. And Limberlost is a story that lives in this magical realism, but in the real world, and it's honest and it's rough and it's raw and it's scraggly. So yeah, I'll say it. Limberlost is my favorite book of all time. Come at me. How good is reading? How do you even describe the feeling that it gives me to read these books? And yeah, this one just feels like home, man. Anyway, they are my top 10 books of all time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. This has been a harder video to make than I thought it would, but I have very much enjoyed talking about my favorite books, sharing my favorite books, and I hope that you get the opportunity to read some of these, or you find a new book that you would love. Let me know in the comments below if there's any of these that you plan on reading. And as I said at the beginning of the video, let me know what your favorite books are. I am always on the search for some new books. Thank you for joining me. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. That goes a really long way. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you being here. And I will see you in the next one. Cheers.